I appear to be live. Alrighty, let's get this all set up. Make sure that my mic is nice and close. I've got it almost peaking, so I do have a little bit of headroom in there, but I'm not going to go too much past that. Alrighty. Oh, I look like such a schlub today, and I'm okay with that, because today is not what I would call very important in some respects. Okay, what to start with? Let's start. Uh, hmm. Right. We got Flea Mortals, Ashley Johnson's debacle, for lack of a better way to describe a domestic abuse situation. Ugh. And there was do 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 do. The new TSR declaring bankruptcy. And then might get to some stuff that's less important, less timely. Okay. I will probably cut this intro out and start from about here. So I'm Dan, the new DM. I'm tired, but I got my coffee here. My hair is a little bit of a mess. I haven't shaved. But the last time that I sat down to do one of these, I said I was going to do something other than going over the new Unearthed Arcana / playtest stuff. And then they put out a whole bunch of playtest stuff. So I don't want to do those today. I might get to it later if I have the time and energy, because I also need to do some bureaucracy for business. Because who knew, a 3-subscriber YouTube channel, only we've still got to have a day job. All right, I want to talk about some drama / news stuff. It's mostly just news, but if I put drama in the title, it'll get more attention. And the first one I want to talk about is really unfortunate. Well, they're all one of them's funny. The other two are unfortunate. So, MCDM. This is Matt Colville. I love these guys. If you haven't seen Matt Colville's YouTube channel, it's great. I think he also does like Twitch live streams and has like a Discord server, all that kind of stuff. I mostly just catch his stuff on YouTube, and I'll usually forget about it for a little while, and then I'll binge like 5 or 6 episodes at once. But he does running the game and is all about making D&D both easier to run as a DM, but also more enjoyable for your players. And he does it really well. So he has done a couple of books. And he has done it through Kickstarter, as you can see here. And every time you go and you sign up for a Kickstarter, you have to remember it is a risk. There is a chance that there might be issues when it comes to getting the final product. I move myself over to here, because then when I look into here, yeah, because I'm mirrored. Well, sort of. Anyway, yeah, I ordered one of these. I'm not logged in right now, so it says pre-order here, but I have backed this. They got about $2 million in backers. It's happening. I've been getting all of the PDFs and stuff. And a bunch of people right now aren't happy. Because, as I said, there's always a risk involved when you're dealing with Kickstarter. Any of these crowdfunding kind of websites and stuff, they are... The design of them is that there's a chance stuff might not happen, right? We got here even risks. They have a whole section on risks. That is a good thing. I want, like, if you ever put a Kickstarter together, I think you might even have to put risks on it. Now, some people are a little spoiled by Kickstarter as of late because, for example, I've done a bit of stuff, I believe, for STL files for my 3D printer. For things like that, a lot of times the product is done-ish, and they want to basically do it as like a bulk buy. Where, hey guys, if we get enough sales, we'll include more, and we'll include more, and we'll include more. Because if you haven't done a Kickstarter before, generally the way it works, they want X amount of dollars to put out a product. Like whatever that happens to be. And when they put out said product, it will have this, right? So what's in the book? And they've got a whole thing on what's in the book. And then we have stretch goals. Now, that's where they are running into some problems currently and have ticked off a few people. Now, they put out I don't know if I'd call it a press release, but they put out a post explaining a major change that is happening to Flea Mortals here. Now, if you're not familiar with Flea Mortals, it's looking to be great. Despite all the issues, and there's only really two, Flea Mortals, there's a reason I backed it. As soon as I looked at the preview that they give you here, that link there leads to a preview, a 24-page document that's got action-oriented monsters, and they're great. They've got art for some of them, some they don't, which is fine. That's kind of how it goes. But they are more designed for making the DM able to quickly do their turn while having cool stuff happening on the DM's turn that makes things interesting for the players, right? Keeps it interesting for the DM because you're acting quickly and you're doing cool stuff, but you do it really fast. They also have some, if you watch some of Matt Colville's stuff, he's a big fan of 4th Ed. So he has incorporated some of the 4th edition rules of sorts and figured out how to make them into 5th edition. Big one, he has a whole video on skill challenges. I love them. I have them in at least 2 to 3 times per campaign. I space them out, but yeah, I love skill challenges. But he also took the minions rules. If you aren't familiar with those, they're creatures that have like 1 hit point and you get swarmed by them. And they don't really work too well in 5th edition in just the standard way to do them, but they have figured out a way to do them. And it's great. They're set up to die really fast, but they're set up to be very dangerous if you don't kill them really fast. And yeah, the rules are in the free thing. If people want, we'll see the response to this video. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. If people want me to go over some of the stuff in the book and whatnot, I don't know if I can show the book proper even once I get it, because it's a book. It has copyright stuff and things. But the preview I can go over and explain how it relates to the main book. So I do recommend checking it out for yourself, whether you're a player or a DM. It is really interesting. But this is going to come with 300 stat blocks. So basically 300 monsters-ish. I say ish because, for example, with goblins, instead of just here's a goblin, here's a hobgoblin, it was here's 8 different variations on Goblin, where we've got different types of casters, we have different ranged creatures, we have this, we have that. So they have variants on different things. They're not doing art for all 300 because that would be insane, but the book is going to end up being over 300 pages long in its current form, and that is where they're running into issues. I believe they're expecting it to be between 320 and 390 pages, and it's heavy. So, 2 things have happened. 1, shipping has become a nightmare. Just straight up shipping is a nightmare right now, especially for people who are out of the country, because they're based in the US and are having these printed in the US. I live in Canada. I pledged $70 American, which worked out to like $90 Canadian. And they did note shipping is not included. Taxes and VAT not included. So when you go to the risks, they even specifically mention the biggest risk to this project is the fulfillment side of it, the printing and shipping. They started this not peak pandemic by any means, but peak supply chain collapse. So by doing that, or by having it then, they didn't want to post any type of like, here's how much it costs to ship this, because they had no idea by the time they're done how much this thing was going to cost to ship. So I paid $45 American. Now, Canadian dollar wise, that means I'm probably close to $150 Canadian for a book. That's like 2.5 brand new D&D books. This is the thing with Kickstarter, though. And again, I think people have kind of the mindset when it comes to Kickstarter of 2 things. One is they kind of think of it like early access, where I might get something for cheaper than if I bought it in the final product. I don't. There are some situations where that does work. Like I said, STL file things, like 100%, it works. You can easily get a better deal if you follow your favorite creators on Kickstarter and blah, blah, blah. But this time, no. And I expected it to be more expensive than going to the store and buying a book, because I am contributing to it happening. So, yeah, it is kind of unfortunate how expensive this has become, but I can let that slide. Here is the bigger issue, though. Whenever you do a Kickstarter, you put in stretch goals, generally. And as you get more money, you do more things. Now, some of them have been easier for them to sneak in. Now, where did... That's risk. Where did they put... This will be an edit point. Monsters in Batches. They lived up to this 100%, I will say. Because I already have... Yeah, I already have a whole bunch of the monsters from this. I haven't used too many of them just yet. Part of me kind of wants to wait for the book, but I've been enjoying what they've been sending me. Anyway, here we go, stretch goals. So this is where they also screwed themselves over a little bit. So they made this pretty quickly. Cool. They added the rival adventurers. That one, I believe, is going to be in the main book. And then they have lairs and hordes. So they hit the $1 million mark. They doubled it. Which doubling it, not to skip around too much, meant they're going to do this campaign, a campaign for North Africa. I've never heard of it. Apparently it is like a huge slog. Like, it's the most ambitious logistical simulation of real world World War II conflict. Yeah. According to the box, it takes 1,500 hours to play. These people are insane. But have fun, I guess, right? It's one of those, hey, if you like watching people stream a game with very, very complex rules, aren't you glad you kickstarted this? But I mean, it was fun. Like, it's the same idea of like they added on, I think it was the Vox Machina one. They added, like, we're going to go through a haunted house. And then they did it, right? Then we're going to do this one shot. And then they did it, right? They're going to do this campaign in a ridiculous, ridiculous game. So they got that. But the problem one is Lairs and Hordes. And it is a problem. Now, they kind of covered their butts a little bit, where they said, this is actually quite a bit of extra content. So, it may be this turns into two separate, into its own separate book that you would get along with the new monster book. Here's the problem. They didn't want to cut any content, so they have now made Lairs and Hordes its own book. And if you backed Flea Mortals, you will get the book for Flea Mortals, like 300 and somewhere between 320 and 390 pages. Right? They even say over here, 320 plus. Make sure that that was not visible. They even say over here, 320 plus, right? This is the problem. They've moved it to be a second book, which I'm okay with, but they're only supplying the second book as a PDF. Now, the book you get alongside the new monster book. I'm at odds. I understand why some people have no issue with this, and I understand why some people have a lot of issues with this. The big one being, this is already a really expensive book. I paid, like I said, well over $100 Canadian for the hardcover plus PDF. Now, if they were just including this as, if they said here, it may end up being a PDF if it doesn't fit or something, I don't think there would be any problems here. Because they even say right here that you will have a glossy monster book with 320 plus pages of stuff. And it sounds like we're getting more than that, which is rad. That's cool. That's awesome. They also, as I mentioned earlier, oh, that's why people can see it. Shipping was not included, and that they were worried that it would end up being expensive. And it is. They have a lot of people complaining about the fact that this now becoming a second book means the shipping is going to be atrocious if you live in quite a few countries. I personally don't want to pay the extra shipping for a book I already am supposed to be getting. When that shipping costs almost, I think it costs more than most D&D books are currently. It's kind of getting a little wonky right now. Amazon's not the best comparison, but I am just going to quickly check here. Dungeons and Dragons. How much is the player's handbook right now? Yeah. Well, yeah. Dungeon Master Guide, hardcover, $58 Canadian. Free shipping, right? Now, Amazon has ruined people's interpretation of how much shipping costs. So, there's that. And I understand why it is so expensive. Because it being shipped from country to country right now, it's ridiculous. It's just across the board. Between gas prices never really going back down and the supply chain having all sorts of issues across the board, right? So if you live in Europe, not only are you paying an arm and a leg for shipping, and then the taxes and stuff on top of that, you may have to pay it again if you want the second book. And you do have to pay it again if you want the second book. Now, they have unfortunately also landed into a giant quirk of the shipping industry where if you have something that goes over a certain weight, it's a problem. When they add, and they've done the testing on this, testing, quote unquote, they check the numbers. When you add the second book, it ups the shipping again to the point where it actually is cheaper. I kid you not. It's actually cheaper to ship 2 books separately because it starts getting calculated differently once you move it up to the next weight class. It's silly, it's dumb. It boggles my mind, especially like I said, with how much the shipping for a book is. But that's just the world. I'm hoping they shopped around for shipping companies because, like I said, I think it's a little bit much, but I kind of get it as somebody who has done some. I've shipped a few things around Canada here, and it can get pretty darn expensive pretty quickly. So I'm not too put off by how much the shipping has been. But however, I can understand, like I said, if you're living in Europe and you're paying taxes and stuff on that shipment, and it's an arm and a leg, and then they're saying, well, we'll discount the book for the second one, so we break even, which is an important little other note that I think is them doing a step in the right direction for some of the contention going on. If you want to buy the second book, you can purchase it through their shop when it releases, and they will send you a code that basically gets you it at cost, and then you cover the shipping. Now, I'm disappointed in that for the simple reason of the original book would have been released at the $1 million mark on the kickstarting process here, right? So we are entitled to our original book no matter how much they got. And then they crossed into their stretch goals. They made $2 million and didn't account for the extra costs. That annoys me, right? They even said, hey, if we hit 1 million, we're going to add this. That hurts. Now, I know they have, 14,000 backers for the hardcover basic and almost 4,000 backers for the limited edition hardcover. So they do have to ship out a lot of books. That's a lot of books. But you had in your stretch goals that if you hit $1 million, you were potentially sending out a second book. And now you're sending out a PDF. And like I said, I completely understand miscalculation to an extent here of, oh no, we don't want to cut content to add this to the book, but it is going to be way more expensive because we don't want to cut content to the original book, right? Like if they cut the original book down to say 200 pages and then they ship this 150-page Lairs and Hordes, they'd probably keep everything in line. They'd probably be able to essentially, they'd be still sending out a 300-page book, but then they would also be sending out the supplement to put it over the top to 350, right? But I don't want a 200-page monster book. I want a 300 or not page. Oh yeah, no, I want a 300-page monster book with 300 monsters in it. And they are still doing that. But they've kind of screwed themselves up on the Kickstarter side, the stretch goal side. That's where the contention is, and that is where I believe some contention is earned. Matt Colville's MCDM has had some debacles with Kickstarters in the past, where I believe like a page of the book got sent unprinted or something like that. Like I think it was their printer's fault, not theirs, but they were kind of left with the bag a little bit. And that sucks. But yeah, a lot of people have had mixed results doing Kickstarters through Matt Colville and his company. And it's really too bad because I am looking forward like crazy to that monster book. Even with how much it cost. When I got the bill for the shipping and had a little because I paid the same amount in shipping as I do for a regular D&D book. I paid it. I could have asked for a refund. They're accepting refunds. That is another big plus, I will say. If you're like, no, I don't like this. I pledged for 2 books potentially, and you're now giving me a book and a PDF. I want my money back. They will give you your money back. And that, I think that's a big olive branch out. So if you are proper pissed about this, which you can be, like I said, I think they screwed up. They're trying to make it sound less like they screwed up and more like they're giving more content than they anticipated. You guys screwed up. Plain and simple. Like you put a stretch goal on that you can't deliver, right? And again, I've seen this happen, not necessarily from them, but I've seen this happen on some of the video game side of it, where they put a lot of stretch goals on this video game that they're really looking forward to. Oh, shoot. Well, thankfully nobody's watching. I have to restart this because I didn't hit the recording button. But that's okay. It's a live stream that nobody's watching that I'm using mostly just as an excuse to get better at live streaming. And this is part of it. Okay, now that I've hit the recording button, I'm Dan, I'm the new DM. And we're going to look at some D&D drama. It's more news, but dramatic news. So where's the line? The big thing is drama gets clicks, so I'm going to do my best to have drama in the title, but I don't really want to delve too deeply into anybody's personal drama, which we'll get to a little bit of that, but at first, up first, we are going to look at a bit of a debacle going on with Flea Mortals, the MCDM monster book. If you're unfamiliar, MCDM, that's Matt Colville's company. They have put out, I think this is technically their 3rd major book release, because they had Kingdoms and Warfare and Kingdoms and Keeps or something like that. They had 2 other books that I've heard nothing but good things about. There was some hiccups in the printing process and stuff. But that is the thing with Kickstarter. Kickstarter is, generally speaking, a risk. There are countless people out there who have kickstarted products that have never become available. And once the money's gone, it becomes really hard to get a refund on. So you do always take a risk when you back one of these programs in a Kickstarter. So what's going on with Flea Mortals? Well, Flea Mortals, like I said, Matt Colville, great YouTube channel, runs the Running the Game series that he just really has good advice for DMs. Highly recommend it. But he has started putting out these books, and Flea Mortals is the latest one. Now, if you haven't, I highly recommend checking out the preview PDF for it. It's really good and convinced me, yeah, I'm going to back this Kickstarter. And I knew going in, like I said, that there are some risks involved. You are buying a product that is not finished yet. There are no reviews out for it. The ink has not hit the page yet. There are risks. And those have come a bit to fruition for some people, or at least the negative side of the risks. Now, thankfully, they covered their butt on a little bit of the risks. So the first big issue that has popped up for me before I started looking at the other issue is the shipping. Shipping on these has been ridiculous. Now, that's a bit out of their control. There's not a lot they can do. When they first put this Kickstarter out, we weren't in the peak of the pandemic, but we were in peak supply chain falling apart and shipping became super duper expensive. And it never really came down. So they didn't want to quote what the shipping was. So on all of these, shipping is not included. Makes sense. But it ended up being quite a bit more than most people, including myself, were expecting. Now, if I go on Amazon, which Amazon has completely dissolved the concept of how expensive shipping actually is. It's honestly one of Amazon's biggest strengths is their logistics. It's the reason they've kind of dominated over a lot of other companies because, yeah, shipping a book is super expensive. My mom used to ship books back and forth between her and her sisters because then they could like finish reading a book. Oh, you should read this one. And they would send like 5 or 6 books in like a box to each other. They don't do that anymore, not because they don't read books, but because it's so expensive to ship them that it's cheaper for them to say, hey, you should just go buy this book. That is where we're at when it comes to shipping. So I paid $70 American and $45 shipping American to have this sent to Canada. That's a lot. Like I said, I can get a D&D book proper through Amazon and it'll be cheaper than the shipping I paid to get this. But that is the thing. When it comes to Kickstarter, it's not the early access thing on like Steam or whatever other platforms are out there that let you do the early access thing. There, you're usually getting access to the game early and you save a bit of money because you're helping the developer finish the game. That's sort of the trade-off that you get when you pay for early access on a video game is, generally speaking, you're getting the product ahead of time. It's going to be buggy. You're helping beta test it a little bit for them, but you shouldn't do that unless you really support the game. Or sometimes it saves you a bit of money, right? I did the early access for Solasta, the D&D RPG. Really good game. And yeah, it was cheaper, I think for the first year, the early access I paid for was cheaper than buying the game outright. And now it's been on sale a bunch and stuff, which is fine. But yeah, in this case, when it comes to Kickstarter, I think a lot of people were expecting it to end up being cheaper-ish than buying the final product. And that's very seldom the case for physical products from what I have seen, which is why they tend to throw in other stuff, right? There's add-ons and other cool things that you can do. And the add-ons, again, they're almost always more expensive than just buying them outright. But you support them. That's the idea. You spend extra money to help get the product made. That's what Kickstarter is supposed to be, generally speaking, is like, hey, we want to make this product, give us money so that we can make this product. Vox Machina is another example. They made one of the biggest Kickstarters, I think the biggest Kickstarter that's ever been done was the Vox Machina TV series. And you didn't get like a copy of it in the end. You got the series made, and then you could go watch it on Amazon. But they never explicitly said in the Kickstarter, like they kind of saved their butts there. But they weren't planning on doing like a here's your physical DVD kind of thing for it. Anyway, I digress. So They said shipping, outlandish, etc. But then they've ran into another issue. On these, like I said, there is a risk inherently when you do a Kickstarter. And one of those risks is that things change. Now, like I said, they put risks right down here. They lived up to, like, they were worried about these packets causing themselves a headache. I think they lived up to that just fine. It kept the hype going. Like, they just keep sending me emails of like, hey, you have PDFs that you can go and use in your game. They're play tested. They're fun, which is sweet. So they made that work. But the problem they ran into, and this has happened in so many Kickstarters, is the stretch goals. How many times has a video game put a stretch goal on their campaign and they screw that up because they have too many stretch goals? They underestimate how much the original product is going to cost to make, and then they can't actually live up to those stretch goals. That's not exactly what's happening here, thankfully. It's a little wonky, but they're kind of making the best out of a bad situation that, in my opinion, they kind of created, but we'll get to that. So they passed the first stretch goal. Cool. They added rival adventurers. All right. Lairs and hordes. This is the problem one. Now, the big one, I guess, for some people is they broke the $2 million mark. So they're going to eventually do this streaming campaign for funsies here. They said similar, like Vox Machina did this, like the Critical Role cast went to like a haunted house and they did some unrelated one-shots and stuff to just add more and more stretch goals to their thing. So that's fine. I don't care about that one. This one, they were going to add lairs and hordes. So quite a bit of the creatures in the book that they have, this new monster manual, they can have their own lair. And that has, like they said, treasure hordes, has maps, encounters, there's lair actions for some of the bosses and things like that, that then if you have the lair designed as a DM, it's kind of nice because it's like, oh, I don't even have to design this lair for this boss that I've given a name to and made like the big bad for this current session or arc or whatever. Super handy. And they hit 1 million, easy, right? They're in the $2 million mark for this Kickstarter campaign. And they say right here, this is actually quite a bit of extra content. Very true. So it may turn into its own book that you would get along with your new monster book. Herein lies the problem. Two things. One is they underestimated how much it would cost to add all of this content to a book in terms of printing. It would make it ridiculously large. I think they said it would be a 500-page book if they put it all together, because their 320-page monster manual is turning into something like a 370-page one. And then the Lairs and Hordes is adding like 150 to 200 pages. So they're like, okay, 500-page book. Not only is it unwieldy, two problems start to happen. One is it is heavy enough that the shipping that was already expensive, people are already, myself included, a little perturbed by how expensive the shipping was. Even though, like I said, they were very explicit about, hey, this might end up being really expensive. Careful. It would have like doubled the shipping, right? And I would not be very happy paying $90 to ship the $70 book I backed. I don't know if I would still be getting it if they kept it that way. So option 2 was split it into 2 books, like they say here. Now they've gone this route. However, they've discovered 2 things. One is, again, shipping the 2 books would double the cost of shipping, making it unruly. Just very expensive. On top of that, I have a slight suspicion that with how many books they're sending out, they were not expecting it to be as expensive to do the second book as it kind of has panned out to be. So their solution is a bit of a middle ground approach, which, as we all know, when you find that middle ground, instead of making some people happy, you make nobody happy sometimes. Now, they've made quite a bit of people happy in the middle here. There are quite a lot of people who are like, okay, yeah, this is fine. I mostly wanted the book, or the monster book, and now I get this other stuff. Cool. But what they're doing is they're keeping the monster book full fat 370 or 390 pages or something like that, and sending that out. That's what you get. And then we will send you the PDF of this stretch goal. Rather than cutting any content, here is the content, but it's in PDF form. Now, I'm okay with this because I understand the rationales, but it does kind of suck because they did put in their stretch goals like, hey, we're going to send you a second book. Well, that kind of sucks. But I think I mentioned earlier, right? If you back a video game and they fail to put in a stretch goal, but they manage to get the game out, and then as the game is out, they kind of do a kind of sort of not really DLC kind of thing, we'd probably be okay with that. So I understand if somebody was expecting a giant book, which it is still going to be a giant book, or if they were expecting a second book, because that's what they said here, that they are perturbed by this. On top of that, you can get the second book. They are going to discount it to anybody who backed to the level where they would have gotten said book, so that you get it at cost, but you would still have to cover the shipping. Now, that's where I don't know if I'm going to bother getting the second book, because if the shipping's $45 again, I don't know. That's starting to get, again, where I already have all the content in PDF form. Yeah. So they kind of created a situation for themselves. This is 100% my opinion, MCDM's fault. I think they covered their bases pretty well, right? I can't really get angry at shipping when they said, hey, there's a chance the shipping is going to be really expensive, and then the shipping ends up being really expensive. There's not much they can do about that. However, having the stretch goal kind of collapse on itself a bit, I would rather they not cut content to fit this in, right? I wanted the monster book above all. I'd rather have the monster book be complete and then have the layers and hordes as a secondary thing, whether it be a book or a PDF, then have them chop stuff out of this book. However, they knew how much content this would make, and they knew that the original book was going to be 320 plus pages. If you know that ahead of time, they should have looked into this a bit closer, in my opinion. So I still probably consider this a good solution for a problem that they created. Now, I like Matt Colville. I will continue to watch his videos. I will, if he does another book that I have interest in, this isn't going to leave too sour of a taste in my mouth, but I will just be prepared for those shipping costs, because that's the big thing that hit me. But I do understand, if you backed this and you are annoyed at these changes, I get it. Your distaste is justified in my eyes, but here's the other big thing, and one of the other reasons why I'm not too finger-waggy and angry about this. As far as I have seen, anybody who has asked for a refund is getting it. That to me is a big deal, right? Because it's not so much if you have an issue, it's how you handle the issue that tends to matter in the end. And I think this is a good solution that they've come up with, where it's like, hey guys, We screwed up a bit, though they're trying to make it sound like they didn't, which is a bit annoying. And why? Okay, this is my other annoyance. I gotta point this out. Why did you make this post for backers only when everything else was just available to the public? Why? Right? Maybe there's a really good reason. Right? Matt Colville, if you see this, let me know. But I think that's a little off-putting. But if you find a solution that's basically, hey, we screwed up a bit, but here's the way we figured out how to make it kind of work, where we're still doing our main goal, right? You're still getting your main book. You're still getting the content that we said we would send you, right? This part of it here, you're still getting. This part of it here, we kind of screwed up on, and we're going to try to find a couple possible solutions that might work for you. And on top of all that, if you're not happy with any of our solutions, we will refund your money. Right? It's not just that they're having an issue, it's that they're resolving the issue, I think, in a very fair way, in that if you don't like our solutions, we're going to give you your money back. If they're like, no, if you don't like our solutions, we're keeping your money, I'd be a lot more up in arms saying I'll never back them again, blah, 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 blah. But I get it a bit of like, this ended up adding way more cost than we anticipated. You should have anticipated it. You've done this a few times. You've made books before. You've explicitly said that it would be a book. If they put a book or possibly PDF on here, they would have saved themselves an immense amount of headache, because they could have just sent out the book. They wouldn't have even had to offer Lords and Lairs as a second book included. If they just said, or this may end up being a PDF or something like that here, which next time I'm sure they will. Right? This is, now, like I said, they've done this before. This is their third release, to my knowledge. Fourth, if you count the fact that they're doing 2 books here. They're learning every time, right? This, I think, is a hard lesson to learn from a consumer perspective, because I'm okay with their solutions, but I'm not 100% happy. When I get my book and when I get the PDF for Lairs and Hordes, I will probably be ecstatic, because I got my 320 plus page book. I got my Arcadia sticker, which I guess is cool. Yeah, I'm getting my stuff. Everything that I initially paid for is coming. But like I've seen countless times on video games and stuff, like once they start overreaching on these stretch goals of like, oh, we did not anticipate that was going to be that expensive and stuff, like that's happened so many times. I think they're learning that lesson now, where like this stretch goal is what's screwing them over. If this didn't exist, or if they had put that PDF thing here, problem solved. So Matt, if you see this, love your stuff. I'm still looking forward to my book. I will not be requesting a refund, but I can understand why some people are. But I am very happy that you are offering that. That, I think, like I said, I can't stress that enough. This Kickstarter is almost shipping, and they are still offering refunds because they made the error. That to me is, even if they don't state it as like, yeah, we screwed up here, blah, 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 right? They're kind of being a little more wishy-washy with it, saying, hey, we didn't want to cut content, so it's making it more expensive than we initially thought. So here's our solution, and try and make it sound like a positive for the end user. The fact that they're offering a refund like 2 months away from shipping, if not a month, I think they're aiming for August, maybe October. We'll see, kind of thing. But like things are hitting the printers and stuff, I think, right now. Like this is coming quick. So like I said, overall, I'm happy. But I can understand why some people aren't. So, you guys, as a wise man once said, you played yourself a little bit here. Oh, that fucking bird. Okay, I'm going to hit the stop recording thing there. I'm sure I can make something tangible out of that. Okay, so other news here. And this is a little bit old, because this, similar to the Immortals thing. Coincidence that that news came out on the 13th, and so did this? Wizards of the Coast may have actually had an L for the... I gotta start that over. Wizards of the Coast may have actually taken a W for the first time in a long while. Sorry, I screwed that up because I'm just so used to them taking L's. TSR is dead again. Good. Now, I am not a giant fan of Wizards of the Coast. I like their game. I don't necessarily like their company. I like some of their creators. I like some... I need to go handle that. Please stop. Here's more light. There's no one else here. It's just me talking to myself. You don't like me. I will figure out a way to soundproof that door. All right, so let's start this for the third time. Wizards of the Coast may have taken a W, which is really hard for me to say because they've taken so many L's. Oh, so many L's lately. And this is a big old W. Unambiguous as well. TSR is dead, and it couldn't have happened to a better company. Oh, man. Because like I said, I'm not a big fan of Wizards of the Coast. I like their product in that I like 5th Ed D&D. I like some of their content creators and some of their writers, and some of the moves they've made lately have been steps in the right direction in terms of cleaning up their own mess and whatnot. But yeah, this though, the lawsuit against them and from them, this thing was just dumb, and I'm so glad it is. Yeah. If you're not familiar, so TSR was like the original company that made D&D, right? They even say this down here, was originally founded in 1973 by Gary Gygax and Don Kay. And it was purchased in 1997. Now, I hate to break it to you people, if you sell your company, you don't have your company anymore. Now, they weren't using the TSR name. I believe that went away fairly quickly. There's actually, I'm not normally a big fan of her content, but Dungeons and Discourse does a really good breakdown. It's not so much I don't like her content. Let me rephrase that. She has a different sense of humor than I do. It's just one of those things, right? Overall, I think she's probably fine and makes good stuff, but it's just not my taste. But she has a video on this that actually goes through a bunch of the history of the multiple times people have tried to revive the name TSR and failed. And because I guess this is technically the third rendition. There was another one that got started and died years back as well. But these guys got together and made a new TSR that filed a lawsuit with Dungeons and Dragons / Wizards of the Coast. Now, this lawsuit was painful. If you go and you read anything on it, so Wizards of the Coast put like a fairly mild disclaimer, in my opinion. Some people got riled up about it, but it was right around the time of, like Netflix and Disney and stuff putting a little disclaimer at the beginning of old movies of like, hey, like we know that there's some like racial content in here that's probably not okay, but here's the movie anyway, right? Like adding some context to some older content that these days would, get you canceled on Twitter or whatever. If Twitter survives the week. Anyway, they put a disclaimer on those, and that was a lot, like a part of what TSR was suing over. Is like, basically, you guys are calling us racist and sexist because the content that sort of has our name on it, you're putting this disclaimer on. If my memory serves, that was kind of like the gist of that. On top of that, they were saying that they abandoned the copyright when they didn't use the TSR name. So Wizards countersued. Nothing really came of it because, we were in, the throes of a pandemic and stuff. A lot of things got slowed down. And they eventually had to file for bankruptcy. Now, in the middle of that, there was like a whole thing of like, hey, you're calling us like racist and sexist and stuff and blah, blah, blah. Some of their higher ups were going on like transphobic tirades on Twitter. They released a, technically speaking, I don't think they ever got to publish it, but they had a game made that had some like really dicey racist stuff in it. Again, go look into it yourself. I've seen a few streamers have to dance around it because I think it might actually break some of YouTube's terms of service, which I always find funny when it's like, okay, I can't actually cover this story because it's that problematic. But yeah, so they had a whole thing. I think they had it where like white humans actually had better stats than other skin colors. Like it was a whole thing. Like it was pretty bad. And it's one of the reasons, as much as I don't like what Wizards of the Coast did with the OGL, because a whole lot of that was like just a clusterfuck. It was bad. One thing that stood out was they were saying like, hey, we can revoke these rights, or not rights, but we can revoke this license if you're doing like blatantly racist or blah, blah, blah kind of stuff. Though it was worded a lot more vague, and it left them at, like, they got to decide what they considered racist or sexist or blah, blah, blah. Like, where they like didn't hold up to their morals and whatnot. That's always a bit of a problem, where it's like, well, we don't want you to make this product, so we're going to look under the microscope at every last little thing and say, oh, this is full of microaggressions, so we're going to delete it, right? That was a worry a lot of people had with that wording. And I believe it still is somewhat in there, but they have laxed it a bit. I have a strong suspicion this is where that came from. It is not only were they having pushback in regards to some of their some of the old content that they had put that label on, but then they're also having other companies trying to put out blatantly racist stuff. You got to make sure that your game isn't attached to that. So I kind of get it, but I that's my tinfoil hat for the day. Is I'm pretty sure that came of it. But anyway, so this company that was claiming not to be cyber squatting, not to be just I think the term's like a trademark troll, where you like get a website and you get a trademark and stuff, and then you just sit on it until somebody infringes on it, and then you sue them. That's basically what they were saying this new TSR was trying to do, and that them putting the lawsuit forward first, like TSR, was preempting everything. And it's one of those things, because like, I think there's a lot of reactionaries out there that were like, Wizard of the Coast has gone too far, wokeness is spreading, blah, 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 blah. Which some of that has merit, I'm sure, right? Over sanitization of media is definitely a problem. Because like, if you get rid of everything that's grating, well, then it just becomes a little too smooth, right? So a lot of those people they were annoyed at the disclaimers and stuff because, well, maybe if people want, I might talk about that down the road, but they were annoyed that they put those disclaimers on, and they had in some cases, some rightful anger, in some cases, I think not. So TSR thought, well, I mean, let's take advantage of that. From what I can see, at least, it was their. This is all alleged, but they then said, "Oh, well, if people are ticked at them for this, let's make that part of our lawsuit and get out in front of it, and then Kickstarter our way into hopefully getting some money out of hopefully get ourselves some money out of this lawsuit," which they didn't. So they have had a revenue, because this is the thing, when you file for bankruptcy, a lot of stuff becomes public. First 23 weeks, they earned $600. Now, I own a business. If I made $600 in my first 2 weeks, right, and that's gross revenue. This isn't before expenses. That would be net. This is gross revenue. This is what they took in. I would have closed the doors. This is bad. This is dumb. I hate it. They should too. As a business owner, this hurts my eyes to look at. And then they have legal fees totaling $384,000. Oh boy. Now, they were supposed to be going for trial in October. That has been postponed to March. I wonder why. It's just, it couldn't have happened to better people. Yeah, and like I said, a lot of this is alleged. They never actually put out the game in question, though I think they were legally obliged not to. Maybe they had some other grand plan and a bunch of products that will never see the light of day, blah, blah, blah. But it sounds a lot more to me like they are sitting on some names and trying to make money off of lawsuits rather than off of product. So, good riddance. Enjoy bankruptcy. Have fun. But yeah. Oh, I don't want to talk about this next one, but I kind of think I should. But I'm gonna have some coffee. Okay, so I considered not making a video on this, but I think it's a necessity right now because of some of the rhetoric I've been hearing outside of the D&D community, and this kind of falls into that. Whoa. me in the other corner here. So if you haven't heard, Ashley Johnson of Critical Role fame and a lot of other stuff has filed a restraining order against Brian W. Foster. This is everything sucks kind of territory. There's no good that comes out of situations like these other than that she has a restraining order and he's, as far as we can tell, away from her, right? That's like the only positive in this situation, is getting her out of a bad one by the sound of it. Now, everything in here is alleged. I cannot stress that enough. Everything is alleged. But who the heck is Brian W. Foster? If you're new to this sphere, he was the host of Talks Machina. He was also the host of one of my favorite shows on Critical Role, because he did Between the Sheets, which, to me, as parasocial as it sounds, that's why I had a hard time processing this, because some of the conversations he had where he got into some of his life and issues and whatnot and was like super open about them and how he's gotten to where he is now in terms of stability and in terms of like past drug use and dealing with addiction and stuff. I was very surprised to hear some of this. So essentially, it, according to the restraining order, he broke glasses, gates, slammed doors, swore at her a lot. He also locked her out of the internet and changed the Ring camera passwords. Now, this is all alleged. And this is why I think I'm actually pleasantly surprised that there hasn't been more articles and stuff on this, right? This came out in May. I waited on this story because I wanted to see what happened next before I even commented on it, if I ever did. But nothing has come out after this. And I think that is why the way I want to frame this is like there are some good reasons to talk about this story, and there are some good reasons not to. And I think people have erred on the side of not talking about it too much. So let's start with the good reasons why we should talk about this whole horrid situation. One is generally abuse as a topic right now, depending on the corners of the internet you're in, is an important discussion. I recently, and one of the reasons I decided in the end to do a video on this, I recently did some audio production for a presentation at our local crisis shelter. And one of the stats that they pointed out is the average amount of times it takes for a domestic dispute or domestic abuse victim to leave is 7. So it's not an instance happens and they leave. Like it's the average is 7, which means that there are some people, one instance happens and they go, and then there are some where it's far more. So I think it's important to talk about abuse and what it actually is, because looking through this and some of the threats and things like that, it doesn't sound like he ever physically attacked her. But that kind of doesn't matter. He has threatened to do so by the sound of it multiple times. Again, alleged. Okay, so I've recently seen, there was a viral clip going around of people are too soft, people are leaving their relationship, you have to endure a bit of ups and downs and blah blah blah, and that was in the context of physical abuse. And a lot of these people who think in that mindset don't even think that emotional abuse or verbal abuse is abuse. Like, it's just like, oh, you're just being no, it is. On top of just generally, you shouldn't be, yelling a bunch of stuff at your spouse. When you're dealing with things like they are breaking things and whatnot, something to always consider. There is a difference between being really mad in a conversation and saying, I need to go cool off. And the way you go cool off is you hit a punching bag and you take out that frustration on the punching bag. There's a difference between that and putting your fist through the wall in the middle of a conversation. Because when you do that, when you purposely make sure they see you do it, the implication is, I could do this to you, but I'm choosing not to. Look how frustrated I am, right? So that's an important thing. I think, and I've been seeing on the few like Reddit posts and stuff regarding this, a lot of donations and stuff going towards domestic dispute stuff and domestic abuse stuff. And I think that actually is one of the very few positives that can come out of a situation like this, is raising awareness of that kind of thing. The other big thing that I think this is a good reason to kind of bring up at least this topic is allegedly he is using again. And yeah, this really hurt to see, because again, on Between the Sheets and some of the conversations that he's been open about, he's been very open about addiction issues. And that does kind of, it's not an excuse, but definitely a contributing factor, I would assume, to some of the stuff going on. I really hope, right? I am in the camp of, I want to see two things happen. I want to see Ashley Johnson be safe. I want him as far away from her as she wants him to be. And I want him to get help. Because I have a strong suspicion, as parasocial as it sounds, I have a strong suspicion after seeing his interviews and whatnot that, yeah, like this is a large factor in what is going on here. Yeah. So I think those two things, between bringing up the conversation of what is abuse, what qualifies as abuse, what is enough of a reason to end a long-term relationship, and blah, blah. Throw a bunch of that stuff out, right? Abuse is abuse. We need to... So that's why I think generally discussing some of this stuff, right, between making sure, like, hey, like, yeah, we need to make sure we discuss addiction and, like, the problems that it can potentially lead to. And we need to discuss abuse, be it physical or emotional, and the like how hard it actually is for some people to leave relationships like this. I think that is a valid topic. But now let's get into why I think, for the better, a lot of people haven't been talking about this, and I'm okay with. One of the big things is, as far as I can tell, Ashley Johnson doesn't want this in the news. Right? None of this is like a press release. As far as I know, she has not commented on this at all. Yeah. So diving in and looking for what's going on and like doing exposés on like Brian Foster and all this stuff. No, I don't think we need to do any of that kind of stuff, right? Like I said, I think I've seen one video that talks about, like, briefly what the heck is going on here, which I'm actually pleasantly surprised by. Oftentimes when something this big happens between two figures on the internet, there's a lot of extra speculation. There's a lot of deep dives into things they've said in the past and blah, blah, blah. I think generally speaking, because Ashley Johnson is a fairly private individual, despite being a internet celebrity and a non-internet celebrity, I think a lot of people are leaving this be, which I think is a good thing. Like, this is a very personal situation. And like I said, there's a reason why I, other than bringing up this for this video, I don't really plan on discussing this much else, because I do want to, like I said, I'm only going to go with what's in this article, because I haven't seen any press releases from her. So there's that. The other reason I don't think we should talk too much about this, though I think should be too deep dived into, is we do not have even one side of the story, let alone both sides of the story. Now, I'm not saying that, like, oh, we haven't heard his side of the story, she could be lying. No, I'm very much assuming everything in here is accurate. It is all alleged, but I'm not going to both sides of this and just, we need to wait until we hear his side of the story. What I mean is, we haven't really heard her side of the story. All we have is that she put a restraining order against him, and the public information that is available around said restraining order. She hasn't put out a statement. He hasn't put out a statement. Neither of them has commented on this at all. We don't have her side of the story, let alone his. But we have a filed restraining order that seems real bad. Like, just, oh boy. It sounds like Brian Foster is, or Brian W. Foster, I think the W is important to specify. It sounds like he might be a just horrible human being, at least currently. Like I said, I have a suspicion that drug use and whatnot has been probably a major factor in a lot of this. And I hope he gets the help that he needs for that. But like, some of the stuff that he's being accused of is incredibly heinous. Like I said, don't have his side of the story. Don't even have hers. Okay, now an advantage of the internet. Even though I'm live streaming this, nobody's watching because this is a new stream. I can record this again. So, I want to talk about something that's not really drama. It's not good. We don't really want to get too deep into it, but I think is worth talking about while I'm catching up on some news stuff. Now, this happened in May. Ashley Johnson, if you're not familiar with her, she is internet famous from Critical Role, and she is famous from being an actor. She's been in a couple TV shows. I think she was in quite a few movies. She's a voice actor in like The Last of Us and stuff. Brian W. Foster, if you're not familiar with him, he was a commentator on Critical Role's channel. He did the Talks Machina stuff. He did it was Undeadwood, great series. A little soiled now. And did one of my favorite things that he has ever done was Between the Sheets, which is why this hit like a ton of bricks for me, because I really like Brian W. Foster. Did think he was a brilliant interviewer. I would have liked to see him do a lot more interviews. Now it sounds like there's a chance that he has become a complete piece of human garbage. Now, allegedly. And I have a strong suspicion he has been very open about drug use in the past and addiction. I have a strong suspicion that that is involved in a lot of what we see here, because on May 15th this year, Ashley Johnson put a restraining order against him. And it sounds like a very justified one. Now, there hasn't been a lot of chatter about this on the internet, and I'm pretty glad about that, actually. I only want to bring attention to this story for 2 reasons, and then I want to actually get into why I'm glad I've been seeing very little discussion about it. So the 2 reasons that I'm glad that there have been a bit of discussion around this is the concept of abuse. By the sound of it, Brian Foster didn't lay his hands on her, but yelled at her a bunch, intimidated her a bunch, broke a bunch of other things, locked her out of the internet, and like a few other things, tried to extort a bunch of money from her and her family. Like this kind of stuff, like unhinged, horrendous behavior. Ugh. But I've been reading and watching some stuff recently that's been talking about abuse and whatnot, and a few things have come up. One is this weird thing that's been going around right now. There was a viral video a couple weeks back, probably a month back now, of like, oh, if you're in a relationship, you got to be able to endure and blah, 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 and like work through these hard times, even if somebody's a little bit abusive. And it's just, no, like a whole bunch of these are crazy big red flags. And I think she made the right decision getting out of there. Now, that being said, somebody might look at this and say, well, like it says like there's a history of verbal abuse, that they had a huge fight earlier this year. Why would she still be with him? Now, I'm not going to get into some parasocial trying to analyze their lives, because Ashley Johnson is actually despite being a internet and non-internet celebrity, very private in a lot of ways. So I don't want to go digging through that and speculating on a lot of that, but I will quote from somebody I heard from recently, because I was doing some audio for an event in my town here for our local crisis shelter, and they said statistically the average amount of instances it takes for somebody to leave an abusive situation is 7. Which means there are some people out there where it's 1, and there are some people out there where it's way more. It's not as simple as they had this big fight and he broke a bunch of things, said a bunch of things, and then she should have left then and there. I mean, she should have in a lot of ways, don't get me wrong, but it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as, oh, he did this, so why didn't she just leave then? Humans are weird. So I think talking about this can bring that up. And one of the biggest positives I've seen from the discussions that I have seen that have gone on about this situation, most of them have been pretty respectful of Ashley Johnson's privacy and haven't tried to deep dive in and see if they could find more information and blah, blah, blah. Most of the posts that I've seen around this are, we need to just throw our backs behind her a bit, or throw ourselves behind her a bit, that we support her, all that. And here is how you can donate to some local, or in the case of like the Reddit stuff, I think it was more of a like a universal charity that helps people with like dealing with instances of domestic abuse and stuff. So some positives kind of being brought out, right? If this instance coming to light leads to a bunch of donations going towards helping people who are victims of domestic abuse. I think it is a good thing that it came to light in some respects. But then we get into, and I think I said there's two reasons that I kind of think we should talk about. The other, is drug use. I have a suspicion that this is a large contributing factor to everything going on here, because none of this sounds like somebody acting rational in terms of Brian Foster, and he has openly spoken about his drug use in the past, which is what makes this especially heartbreaking, because I have my headcanon, for lack of a better way of putting it, is it sounds like somebody started using again and has just gone off the rails in terms of their life and their actions, which sucks. And it's why I give him, I don't ever want to say that this is an excuse. He is making a bunch of horrendous choices and decisions. It's a contributing factor, I would suspect. So I hope he gets the help that he needs. If you are having issues with addiction and with substance abuse, it is okay to ask for help, right? Making your substance abuse a problem for other people in terms of you need help from other people, go for it. That is a healthy thing, is getting support and getting help. But as soon as it becomes a contributing factor to you making your addiction somebody else's problem in this kind of context, it's like I said, it's a contributing factor, not an excuse, right? So I'm hoping he goes and gets the help that he needs, but it's not a case of, like I said, like, oh well, it was the drugs. Like, no, this goes beyond that. But I do hope that this does lead to some discussion of and some people asking for help with their addiction issues. But yeah. Now, thankfully, like I said, I have been seeing very little discussion about this and very little like deep diving into the situation. This is like the only information we have because Ashley Johnson is very private. So I think that is very good. I really, other than wanting to discuss the abuse side of things and like just talk a bit, like if it wasn't for the fact that I went to that event and heard about how long it often takes people to get out of these horrendous situations, I probably wouldn't have even wanted to talk about this, and that kind of spurred me to like, maybe I should just do a quick video on it. For the most part, though, I think almost everybody seems to be leaving Ashley Johnson be and letting her deal with this in private, which is good. I don't care to dive into this if she puts out a press release, like if her publicist or whatever, because I'm assuming she has one. If somebody puts out more info, I might read it just to see the situation, because morbid curiosity isn't the right term, but it's not quite a parasocial, like I want to know what's going on in her life kind of situation either. But yeah, I think it's been really good to see, especially because the Critical Role fan group can be a bit much. It has been nice to see them not going too overboard with this and not getting really parasocial and crazy on it. That has been a really good thing to see. And I say that as somebody who is currently wearing Critical Role pajamas. This isn't a criticism necessarily of my fellow Critical Role fans. This is me saying good job, because, yeah, we do have some in our midst that are a bit more obsessive. So nice to see that. Now, another reason why I'm glad I'm not seeing too many like deep dive exposés on this situation is we don't have any information. Everything in here is alleged. And I don't mean that in the, oh, well, we haven't heard his side yet. It would take a lot for me to look at this and say, oh, I can see it from the other side. Like, I'm giving Brian W. Foster a bit of grace because I have a strong suspicion that his addiction issues are a large contributing factor to some of his unhinged behavior. That's as far as I go. I would have to see something ridiculous to be like, oh, now that I hear the other side, when I say we don't have the information, I mean we don't even have her side of this. Ashley Johnson has not put out a press release about this, to my knowledge. She hasn't gone public saying, hey, guys, here's what's happening. Here's, please leave me be. She filed a restraining order and then went on with her life. Which I cannot express how healthy that is from a celebrity standpoint. Of just, I'm not going to do any interviews on it. Like, she's not saying she's not going to. What I'm saying is she's not doing any interviews on this. She's not putting up, a twit longer or doing a live stream, milking it in any way, right, and getting it out that way. She's just living her life and trying to move on. And I hope, because like I said, it's been almost 2 months since this initial story dropped. I hope she's doing great. I know a few people who've met her in real life and worked with her on like Last of Us stuff and things like that say that she is lovely and that she's amazing and all that. And I'm like, all right, cool. That's good to know, because, sometimes you hear about a celebrity and you think they're really great, and then you hear like, oh no, actually behind the scenes they're a total unhinged dick. But it sounds like Ashley Johnson, I wish her all the best. I hope that she gets to the other side of this. Yeah, it's a very difficult situation. It's difficult to talk about, both because I don't think we should, like I said, I don't think we should deep dive in and talk too much about this stuff, because I think privacy is being implied here. Like I said, she is way more famous than her alleged abuser. She could go and just throw on every social media platform a whole bunch of stuff and go on a bunch of interviews, right? Like, there are so many TV channels that would have her on in a second to talk about this, but she's not doing that. She's being a regular human being and just living her life, and I commend that. And I hope that there's no good that can come of this situation, but it sounds like she got out of a bad one. So I have a suspicion that compared to where she is now or where she was a few months ago, this time next year, she's going to be in a much happier place. So it's going to be a bumpy road till then, dealing with court stuff and all that. But yeah, like I said, it's really too bad. I loved Brian W. Foster's content. I really like his interviews. I thought he was funny. I really didn't like. I was taken aback by this because I really wanted. I really like, again, parasocial as hell, but I really wanted these two to make it, because they seemed like, watching the between the sheets between the two of these, it's like, oh man, this is great. Oh, this is awesome. And it's not. But that's the thing, is you don't know somebody from the few hours you see of content of them on the internet. You have no idea what's actually going on. Even if they're telling you their life story in some cases. It's just impossible to know exactly how they'll be out in the real world. But yeah, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Ashley Johnson, I wish you all the best. I hope you get out of this situation. It sounds like you're making all the right steps to do so, and good on you. And yeah, like I said, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot to be able to remove yourself from a situation like this, and I'm glad you did. Brian W. Foster, go fuck yourself, but also go get the help you need so that you don't do anything like this to anybody again, right? I'd say that's a good summary. All right. Let's get into drama stuff that isn't like painful for everybody. Da, 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 da. Okay. Start recording. Now, compared to the other drama stuff, let's get into some controversy around Wizards of the Coast that I don't know if they deserved as much grief over as they initially got. So, Dungeons and Dragons clarifies plans for half-elves and mixed parentages in 1D&D, which 1D&D kind of doesn't exist anymore. That's a whole thing of like we swear it's 5e, but it's just, I'm going to call it 1D&D just to keep things simple. But long story short, there's two big changes that it sounds like are happening. One is getting rid of the idea of races, of like elves being a race and humans being a race, because the term race it kind of works, right? We've always used it, fantasy races. That's just what we've always done, and it's always worked. But as we've kind of ran into recently, that word starts to carry more and more weight to it in different ways. That gets a little bit iffy, problematic, if you will. So they're moving away from that. Some say lineage, some are saying species, ancestry. There's a bunch of different things that are being thrown around to try and move away from using the term race to describe them, because we've, like I said, like it's the unfortunate nature of language is that people should all mean the same thing when they say something, but often don't, and it's a whole thing. So they're moving a bit away from that a bit. And then Jeremy Crawford, I believe it was, he was talking about how they want to remove the half to describe heritage. As he quoted here, "Frankly, we are not comfortable and haven't been for years with any of the options that start with half. The half construction is inherently racist, so we simply aren't going to include it in the player's handbook. If somebody wants to play those character options, they'll still be in D&D Beyond. They'll still be in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Several websites latched onto the inherently racist wording." Now, my understanding is they are developing a bit more of like a system to have like a mixed race character, but they want to get rid of the half wording. Now, as they mention on this website here, this is comic book gaming. The inherently part is, I think, what triggered a few people on this. Because it's kind of right, but at the same time, yeah. So the context here, though, I think is also important. This was at their creator conference or creator summit or whatever the heck they call it. And somebody asked what they were doing for inclusion. What are you doing to make the game more inclusive, right? So this wasn't just, hey, we're doing this thing. It was like, hey, somebody asked about it, and they're like, oh yeah, well, this is one of the changes we're making that might make the game more inclusive. The two big things they mentioned were they are using more sensitivity consultants. I think it was in Starfinder. They ran into some issues where they had some stuff slip through the cracks that they were like, oh, there's no need to send them to them. There's no way this could be considered racist. And then it ended up being viewed as a bit of a racist caricature going on kind of thing. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're doing that, but I can see some thinking that they're going to sanitize everything to the point where there's going to be no conflict left in it in terms of that. But anyway, let's get to this half thing. My hope, because we haven't seen any of the races that they've put out for 1D&D. We've seen the new classes and stuff. Like, at least I'm pretty sure. I haven't looked at the new PDF because I haven't gotten there yet. I wanted to do some other content first. But to my knowledge, they haven't put out any new races or any new race information, which does tell me they're probably going to be incredibly similar to what was previously available. And this half thing, I understand where they're coming from. So I'm Canadian. I know I look so normal. But well, I'm Canadian. I'm mixed race technically, but it's like a whole bunch of whiteys. So it's not really something I bother talking about too often. But oftentimes when we talk about like, oh, I'm half this, half this with a little bit of this or something like that. But here in Canada, we have a group of people called the Métis, and they are descendants of white settlers and Indigenous people. And we have a term, and Métis actually just full-on translates to mixed race. If somebody who's Métis comes up to me and says, I'm Métis, or they say, well, like I'm half Indigenous, half white, and I'm like, oh, so you're half white? That's where it gets a little, why? That's a weird way of phrasing it, right? Like if the Métis people here in Canada were all described as half white or half Indigenous, and we left out the other half. I mean, it'd be one thing to say half white, half Indigenous. I think that would be less problematic, but still a little weird when we have a word for it. So having half elf and half orc, I can see why they're saying like that verbiage, that description, that is a bit like, or that is inherently racist. They're not saying that having half elves in the game is racist. They're saying that having half in front, and that's kind of why, right? Like if somebody comes up to you and says, oh, I'm half black, half white, and you just refer to them as like, okay, so you're half white, right? Like that's where it starts to get a little iffy. Or like, oh yeah, no, I'm a mix. My dad's black, my mom's white, and you're like, oh, so you're half white, right? It just comes across weird. And again, this is why I mentioned earlier that like I think it's going to be a good thing once we start moving away from calling the fantasy races, because it saying mixed race out here in the real world and saying mixed race in the game tends to mean two different things and should mean two different things. So there's that. But And yeah, the half construction is inherently racist. Yeah, I've heard it phrased. So this is the interesting thing. This is why sometimes it's better to record things like this. From what I've heard, uh, like I've heard that he was saying that the half wording was the racist part, and then this is saying the half construction is. I would actually be curious what the actual word for word was. But the inherently part is also, I think, what has caused a bit of this problem. If they just said, like, yeah, like sometimes that can be, or something like that, right? Which versus inherently, like it just, that is a word that I think people grabbed onto quite a bit. But I kind of understand where they're coming from in that if you have an entire group of people and it, like, to me it's honestly just a bit lazy. The reason that it is there though is because in the past, in most fantasy lore, but D&D especially, humans are kind of the universal donor when it comes to breeding. So you would describe somebody as half elf because then you know they are half human. You don't have to mention the other half because there's no question about what the other half is. Same thing with half orc, right? Orcs don't breed with ogres. Orcs breed with orcs or humans. That's kind of it. Because a combination of humans will fuck anything, and that's just where we kind of went with it. I don't know. But yeah, so that's where they were trying to kind of come with this stuff. Part of the other pushback that I kind of get, because this all came out right around the time that tensions were really high, right? The whole Creator Summit thing was a big kerfuffle, which ended up being pretty good in the end. Like a lot of Creator Summit, there it is. I was trying to remember Content Creator Summit. I was trying to remember the name, but a lot of what I've heard, depending on what side of the fence you kind of land on, was that either the entire thing was just a complete and utter clusterfuck, or that it started that way. The content creators really were like up in arms of like, this isn't what we came here for. We came here for some answers. We have a lot of questions and we have you in front of us. Are you not going to answer these questions? And then did get a fair bit of FaceTime with and answers and stuff. So some people actually went away from it saying like, no, this actually in the end was a pretty good experience, and I think a step in the right direction. But anyway, tensions were super high. People are grasping onto anything they can to pile on more hate, often justified, towards Wizards of the Coast. And one of the things that came up with this whole half thing is when you say, hey, that is inherently racist, what a lot of people were hearing is, you're calling me racist. And this is an ongoing problem with, like I mentioned in a previous segment on here, so probably a previous video on this channel, that like there was the whole thing with the disclaimers at the front of some of the old school D&D stuff of saying like, hey, yeah, there's some problematic stuff in the background of this, just so you know, like that we don't consider this acceptable, but we didn't want to edit it, which I would prefer that to them going back and like editing out stuff, right? I'd rather it be available and unedited with a disclaimer than edited or not available. It's I don't consider it the lesser of three evils. I consider it the best option. But if you want that content, I would say that, yeah, you should look at that as the lesser of three evils. Like, do you want it just not available? Well, that sucks. Do you want it edited? Well, you'd be more up in arms there, so having the disclaimer is fine. But some of these disclaimers and some of these things saying that, like, saying having these half races is inherently racist, what people are hearing is you are calling me racist, which is a problem, right? You go on Twitter and you say anything mildly edgy, and like that's kind of what you're probably going to get called. And it's kind of starting to lose a bit of its sting for a lot of people. But it sucks being called a racist. And I don't think they are calling people that, but I think that's how people are taking it. The analogy that I came up with I'm a big fan of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Great movie. Great movie. And it has a really homophobic joke slammed right in the middle of it. It just does. Like, and blatantly. Like, it's not questionable whether the joke is, like, because the joke is homophobia, right? They rediscover, spoilers for, like, a fairly old movie, they rediscover that both of them are alive. They give each other a big hug, realize they're two dudes giving each other a hug, back away from each other, throw out a homophobic slur, and carry on with their day, right? Like, it's just, the joke is, hey, we're both not gay, and we need to express that using a homophobic slur that always has been, right? Yeah. Me loving that movie and somebody saying, yeah, that movie has something in it that's homophobic. Does that mean I'm homophobic? No. Does it mean I'm homophobic if I laughed at that when I was a kid? No, probably not. So saying something from the past has, like, some racism in it, or in this case, inherently, which again, I think that was the overstep. I understand where they're coming from, like you said, with the whole half thing, but I think the inherently part was the problem more so. It's, if you like a property and it has something in it that is, like, society has shifted, and we frown upon, like, the way something is phrased or the way something is framed and things like that. That doesn't make you a bad person for enjoying it, and it doesn't make you a bad person for enjoying it now, right? Some of my favorite movies have racial caricatures in it. Some of them are very problematic towards women or towards the LGBT community, things like that. Like, it's just the nature of watching something from the 80s or 90s is that, yeah, things are different now. And reanalyzing it under that lens is fine, right? We still do that with Shakespeare today, right? That's the reason why we look at Shakespeare in English classes and stuff, is that we consider it to still be fairly universal, and that it's something that we can go and enjoy or analyze and all that stuff, right? But, like, Taming of the Shrew is inherently sexist by today's standards. Okay. I'm not going to hold Shakespeare to the same standards of me, right? Romeo and Juliet is an incredibly problematic love story, quote unquote. That's, two teens who end up committing suicide. Spoilers. Yeah, like, we can look back on old media and say that it has some problems and stuff without saying that, hey, you're a problem for enjoying it. So that's my take on this whole half thing. I think it got a bit blown out of proportion, but I think they did eat their foot when they were talking about it, so I'm not too surprised. But yeah, it's a whole thing. I understand where they were coming from at Wizards of the Coast. I understand a bit of the pushback, but I think that the pushback, I think it was ignoring a bit of the context of, like, what are you doing to make things more inclusive? And then they mentioned this, and it's like, oh, well, they're just coming out and saying that something's inherently right. I think some context was missing. Now, you can disagree, right? That's the whole purpose of opinion versus fact, right? In this case, the fact is they said this stuff, and the opinion is my interpretation of it and my reaction to it, right? You're allowed to have a different reaction. You're allowed to interpret things differently. That's fine. But that's my take. Cool. Now, I'm going to be putting this on good old YouTube and stuff, and I get a lot of really long views, but I have very few subscribers. So if you're liking what you're seeing, click that button. Is it a bell? I don't know. YouTube. I just hit this thing that says subscribe. But it's fine. I'm going to be here either way. All right. So, what next here? do I want... Oh, I hate this ad in the background. Do I want to cover anything else today? We got TSR. We have the Matt Colville stuff. Critical Role. Da, 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 da. Um. Videos. Was it Blades in the Dark? Was that the whole thing? I should have researched this. Okay. Let's talk about Critical Role a bit here. Now, Critical Role, you've heard of it if you're on this channel. There's no way you haven't. So there is a bit of a pushback against Critical Role's first, technically second RPG that they've released. I think at least there might be some other small ones that I didn't remember, but I know they did the Familiars one recently. So, no, I don't want notifications from your website, Bells of Lost Souls. Stop doing that. So, most Critical Role stuff has been based on D20 systems. As of late, some of their one-shots and stuff haven't been. There is a system out there, I believe it's called Powered by the Apocalypse. Yeah. So Powered by the Apocalypse is like a design framework developed by some people that probably are really cool dudes, and has been adapted to hundreds of other RPGs. Yeah. So it's not too surprising that, given the Powered by the Apocalypse system is like as popular as it is, that some stuff has crossed over a bit in terms of like you make a horror game that is powered by this system, and then it overlaps quite a bit with a different like a different game that's kind of based off of the same roots. Now I believe they have even acknowledged. I think it's Blades in the Dark or something like that. Like there's another game that I wasn't familiar with. Yeah, Bitity. They've kind of taken a system similar to that and like streamlined it and made it it's kind of its own thing. And they've acknowledged that yeah, a lot of this kind of comes from that game, but I have a suspicion. Blades in the Dark. Powered by the Apocalypse. Blades in the Dark is an evolution of Powered by the Apocalypse, right? So this is the way I would describe this controversy. Do you remember the film Let the Right One In? It's based on a book. So then the American version of it, Let Me In, is also based on a book. The same book. So is one a remake of the other? I would say no. They're both based on the same source material, right? That's a bit more definite one-to-one. This gets a little more wishy-washy, right? Blades in the Dark, at least to my knowledge, is a like a evolution of Power by the Apocalypse, which is a system used by a crap ton of games, which is cool. And then Critical Role took that system and made their own thing, and it can be heavily compared to Blades in the Dark. Now, it's one of those chicken and egg situations, though, because they were saying, hey, this is using the Power by the Apocalypse system. And then I think they've clarified that, yes, this is based a bit more closely on Blades in the Dark. I think they've actually acknowledged, like, yeah, no, this is actually, like, heavily influenced by. It could even be a case of, like, they've played that in the past, or, like, whoever designed the game has played it in the past, but kind of like was like, oh yeah, that works really well. So they took the Power by the Apocalypse system, made their own game out of it, and ended up being like really close. Or it could have been they looked at their game and said, okay, but we want to change X, Y, and Z, and it makes it kind of our own thing. And yeah, like I don't see why it's a controversy other than the fact that, again, initially it might not have been fully disclosed or like fully acknowledged. And if they've changed that, then cool. But it's also because it's Critical Role. I think there's a lot of people out there that like, oh, Critical Role did it, they're going to be extra critical of it. And that's for two reasons. One is they are the biggest fish, and you should be more critical of the biggest fish, right? The biggest fish in the pond is the one that should get the most critique when it comes to them borrowing or modifying stuff from other content creators. That's just the way it is, and the way it should be, right? If I made my own game that was based on Blades in the Dark, I don't think anybody would care, and they shouldn't, because I'm not making any major splashes with it. But I think the problem for some people is that because Critical Role is putting out Candela Obscura, and it is very similar to Blades in the Dark, based off of Power of the Apocalypse, etc., if it is heavily based off of Blades in the Dark and ends up being way more popular than Blades in the Dark, that kind of feels unfortunate. But I could see that. But I think the whole quote-unquote controversy, like I said, is largely just because it's Critical Role, and there's a lot of people who inherently hate them. Oh, that word inherently popping up again. Which is fine. You're allowed not to like them. I have a whole video planned on why you're not, why it's perfectly okay to not like them. But I do. And a lot of people do. So that's kind of where we're at. I think it's a good thing that they're trying some new stuff. If they did blatantly rip somebody else off, they should owe them some money. If they didn't and they just started from the same place, or they have modified things enough, the way that this stuff works, I haven't been agreeing with Professor Dungeon Master over there as much as I used to on a lot of things, but he did a video on this that I thought was actually very in line with my opinions, right? And again, he's allowed to have his opinions. I'm saying I don't agree with him. I'm not saying he's wrong. There's a difference. But he was talking about how in the olden days, you would borrow and share stuff all of the time. That whole thing with the whole OGL fiasco, one of the big problems with the whole OGL thing is it isn't actually necessary. You cannot trademark mechanics and stuff like that in games. That has fallen apart. You can trademark a bunch of stuff in like trade dress and board layout and things like that. Even board layout, it gets a little wishy-washy. So yeah, there's all of these things that you can't like copyright and can't trademark and make like if I make a first person shooter that is a direct clone of a different company's game, well, is it? It's just a first person shooter. Oh, but I did the same map layout and I had the same characters and I named something. Then it, oh yeah, like you're blatantly ripping something off. So yeah, like I said, Professor Dungeon Master has a video on this that I think really points out how like this used to be the way it was done, is you would make a game based on somebody else's game and stuff like that. And when it comes to like the Wizards of the Coast and the OGL and all of that nonsense that happened recently, if you look at like outsiders looking in, the OGL was almost unnecessary because you can't actually trademark or copyright. And don't ask me to define either. I'm not a lawyer. That's why I'm just kind of saying them both each time. But you can't legally say, no, you can't use these mechanics. You can say legally you can't use these characters or these creations that we have in it. That kind of thing, right? There's a reason halflings aren't hobbits anymore. Yeah, so like if you have an original creation that's in your game, they can't take it. But I think like it is a little unfortunate if like one of the bigger names in the industry is borrowing heavily from a smaller name, I guess. But at the same time, it's like it's game mechanics. It's a new game that's based off of a system that is already being used in a whole bunch of games. So I don't know. I think this whole quote unquote controversy was silly, but it's content, and I need some of that. So gonna milk it. All right, I'm gonna end this stream here. It was all over the place. I reshot a bunch of videos live. That was weird. But I'm gonna stream later today and look at these new oh, my brain. Yeah, I'm gonna stream later today and look at a bunch of the new UA stuff because I'm looking forward to that. So I might see you then. Though that might end up being a Tuesday thing.